This is the Rajdhani channel of All India Radio Delhi, broadcasting on medium wave 450.5 meters corresponding to 666 kilohertz. Welcome to the evening transmission, Sanj Tale. We begin this transmission with comments from the press.
This is All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. The Statesman, in its editorial titled Malodor Lingers, writes, "Bad news just won't go away. So it remains to be seen if the lengthy summer vacation of the Apex Court will result in any dissipation of the foul smell that has been created by an in-house committee, albeit of a trio of honorable judges proceeding with the ex parte probe that found no substance in the allegations of the sexual misconduct leveled against the Chief Justice of India by a since dismissed junior worker of the judicial institution. Hardly has a day passed since that controversial finding was announced without more fuel being added to a fire, which eventually must singe the reputation of the court itself. Women's rights activists have been out on the streets detained by the police, and now the government's top law officer has announced that he had, in his personal capacity, having spent more than 50 years as a legal practitioner, recommended an inquiry by eminent former judges, not three subordinates of the CJI. While Mr. K.K. Venugopal has rejected reports of having such grave differences with the government that he had contemplated quitting the office of Attorney General, the fact that he has found it necessary to clarify his position only reflects the dismay among sections of the legal fraternity at the seemingly one-sided procedure the CJI had prescribed for dealing with the case against himself, a procedure that in the public eye seems to run counter to the principles of natural justice. What the ultimate outcome will be is difficult to determine at present. It is unlikely that the pressure will ease. After the Me Too crusade attracted global support, the judicial leadership ought to have been more sensitive to the women's issue. It was expected to break the stereotype attitude of a male-dominated hierarchy, but wound up reinforcing the stereotype even if two women were part of the probe trio. That the panel's findings are not to be disclosed only enhances the enigma. Which fool spoke of the importance of justice being seen to have been done? The Apex Court will be hard-pressed to live this one down. The Asian Age, in its editorial titled A Folly to Believe BJP, Not a Modi Shah Show, says Union Minister Nitin Gadkari, a former president of the BJP, whose term had ended abruptly in a controversial circumstances, protests too much when he says in an interview to the news agency PTI, which appeared on Saturday, it is wrong notion that the party has become Modi-centric. BJP neither became Atal or Advaniji's party in the past, nor can it ever be Amit Shah or Narendra Modi's party, notes Mr. Gadkari, and says that his party's parliamentary board takes all the decisions. These past 5 years, Mr. Gadkari has sat in a cabinet in whose meetings ministers were expected to speak only when they were asked to, not otherwise. Admittedly, he was the exception. In the light of this, it is interesting that the Minister for Surface Transport should say what he has said, given the current state of intra-party politics within the BJP and internal diplomacy within the wider Sangh Parivar framework. Mr. Gadkari's name has done the rounds as a likely successor to Mr. Modi should the PM fail to take his party past the finishing line with the help of Mr. Shah, the party president he has personally selected. Naturally, this holds up as a proposition only if Mr. Gadkari can win his own seat in Nagpur, for internal sabotage from on high has been whispered. The Asian Age, in its editorial titled US Moves Trigger Tension, says the pressuring of the likes of Iran and North Korea may please USA's current hawkish stance, but the world is far from being at ease. The actions of the United States in at least two parts of the world aimed at enforcement of its nuclear policy has led to increasing tensions. The message from the US may be clear about its doctrine, allowing weapons only for states that are its allies or those it does not consider as threats to itself or its friends. This is not a view shared readily by North Korea, which remains a bugbear despite engagement in face-to-face talks at the highest level twice. On the second occasion, the talks broke down as Kim was unwilling to disengage all his nuclear assets, some of which are stored underground. Even before the seizing of North Korea's second biggest coal carrier, Wise Honest, was announced last week, North Korea had begun testing the first of its 3 new missiles, only short range and not of the ICBM type, that may threaten America but can reach ally South